The two cats didn't meow but stared at Kale. He doesn't want to mess around. So he pretended not to know and quickly headed to the Count's house. And then he heard the breaking news. Count Duruth decided to let him go to the capital on behalf of their family. Usually Basin will be the one to go. However, this time, the Count decided to let Kale, the eldest son, go instead. The royal family is holding a big event. The sons of noble families are all invited. Although Basin had attended events like this 2 years ago, he had never been to a royal event like this before. Moreover, he also wanted to let him go this time. Talking about the event held by the royal family, Kale immediately thought of the terrorist attack on the square in the original story. A mysterious organization will terrorize the square, where a lot of people gather in the capital. The only one who can stop their plot is Choi Han. He saved a lot of people there and became close to the royal family like a friend. Kale started to feel chills, as he had to be one of the people in the incident. Just now, his father mentioned that Basin is a person who often went to events like this. Kale was going to ask his brother to go instead this time because he didn't want to go to dangerous places anyway. The difficulty is that he can't speak to Basin. So is there any reason why someone like him doesn't have to go to the capital, and he still doesn't understand why Duruth would do this? In 5 days, he would have to depart for the capital. According to the original, during that time, the real Kale would be knocked out by Choi Han, so he couldn't go to the capital. Kale said he needed more time to think about it. Count Duruth agreed. The extraordinary meeting ended. Kale and Basin left the library. On the way, Basin said to him, "There is no reason for you not to go." After hearing that sentence, Kale became even more confused. Kale was kicked out of the successor position. His brother Basin was acting like a successor 3 years ago, but now he suddenly said that Kale had a reason to represent the family this time. Things were starting to get more complicated than he thought. After all, the chances of Kale returning unharmed were quite high, whereas, if Basin died and didn't become a lord, it would mean Kale would have to take his place, then he would be in big trouble. Basin needs to live so he can have a peaceful life. Right at that moment, Hans came to report to him about Choi Han's situation. Kale told Hans to call him over. And if he doesn't want to come, just tell him to pay for his meal for you. Based on Hans' expression, perhaps the Malin character's problem has been resolved. But now he had to take an unexpected trip to the capital. So he will do everything to make this trip more comfortable. It's time for Choi Han to pay his debt of gratitude. Hans went to call Choi Han over, and now he was sitting in Kale's room, looking around. Kale looked at Choi Han and secretly assessed. Ever since Ron took care of Choi Han's meals, he seems to have gotten better. Ron, Beacrox, and Choi Han, the trio progressed as Kale predicted. Without beat around the bush, Choi Han directly asked Kale what he needed him to do. Kale thought about the events in the novel. He realized that he had changed the beginning of the Birth of Heroes storyline, so many changes occurred. That's why he tried his best not to take things too far and bring everything back to the original storyline. But, you had to go to the capital. This would change the storyline even more. Kale put a piece of paper on the table and said, "First, I need to know what you can do. To put it simply, this is an interview. Keep going." After hearing that Kale wanted to test his ability, Choi Han answered excitedly. Because of that, Kale asked if he knew how to protect others. "What do you mean?" Choi Han was dumbfounded, then immediately answered Kale. Kale didn't say anything. The plan hastily changed, but for some reason it seems to be more beneficial for him. Preventing Choi Han's teammates from getting the ancient ability, and what could be better than when he obtained a useful ability for himself among them. Anyway, it doesn't matter to them whether they have those borrowed powers or not. It's quite simple. Can you protect others instead of killing them? The room suddenly became silent. Kale didn't hear Choi Han's answer. After that, Choi Han bowed his head. This time he answered. "I'm not sure. It would be dangerous if Kale provoked him right now." So Kale chose to put it another way, asking if he could kill people. This time, he easily answered. "I can do that." "Then you can also protect others," Kale replied. "It's going to be quite hard, but hard doesn't mean impossible." In the life Roxa lived, there weren't many cases that he could refuse just because it was difficult. That's why he was always generous with the new life in this useless Kale's body. But now there was an obstacle that he had to overcome if he wanted to have a peaceful life in the future. That's why he needed someone to help him overcome that obstacle. Difficult doesn't mean impossible. Maybe it is, Choi Han replied with a laugh. Okay, last question, Kale said. Just ask, Choi-han replied. Kale asked the last question, what is your name? Choi-han was surprised. You don't know my name? Of course I know, you are the one who was destined to hit me. I've heard other people say it, but I want to hear you say your name with your own mouth. Choi-han. Choi-han held out his hand. My name is Choi-han. Kale grabbed that hand. Oh yeah, and my name is K-Uyn. Now Kale started to get to the main point, what Choi-han could do to repay him. Kale handed the paper on the table to Choi-han, with the names of 2 people on it, Rosalind, Locke. That's right, Rosalind the princess of the neighboring kingdom who survived the assassination. The other is the successor of the Wolf King Locke. He looks weak, but when he goes mad, he will become a werewolf, which is more brutal than anyone. Meanwhile, Rosalind has tremendous strength that is only weaker than Choi-han. She has no interest in the throne. Besides, her wish was to find the greatest magic tower on the continent. As soon as she achieves that goal, she becomes a hero. Kale recalled details in the novel. The person who tried to assassinate Rosalind was tortured by Beecrocs not long after. That detailed description of the torture scene made Kale shiver. Since coming here, he often shivers and has chills. Rosalind and Locke. Kale nodded in agreement with Choi-han. Yes, those 2, so you can read, good to know. Kale pulled out a map from a drawer and unfolded it on the table. First, Choi-han will start the journey with him. His hand pointed to a point on the map, telling Choi-han to just follow the instructions he wrote on the piece of paper. There was a reason Choi-han had to accompany him in the middle of the journey like that. Because in the first episode of The Birth of the Hero, there was a Marquis who was introduced as the villain after Kale. He was the one who always stood in the way of the prince and Choi-han. The special thing is that bastard even had a crazy dragon. He tried to subdue this less than 5-year-old dragon, but then the dragon escaped and got mad. It ended up being killed by Choi-han. The problem was that Kale had to go to the village that the dragon was going to attack. Because if he didn't go there, he wouldn't be able to reach the capital on time. So there were only 2 options, Choi-han had to kill it. Or else they had to let it go before it became aggressive. What Choi-han needs to do here is go to the capital with those 2, that's how he can repay you. Choi-han asked a question. Need to protect these 2? That's up to you. They didn't need his protection, they were already strong. Instead, you must go to the capital and meet me unharmed. Do you have the strength to protect yourself? Why don't you answer? Can you do it? Choi-han's eyes become clearer. Yes, I can do it. Talking to Choi-han is so heartbreaking. He should have been drinking before starting this conversation. You can leave now. Kale waved his hand to dismiss the guest. Choi-han headed towards the door of the room. Kale leaned back in his chair to look at Choi-han, and before the door opened, he said, By the way, everything we talked about until now is a secret between the 2 of us, okay? I got it. Choi-han said and left. Done with Choi-han, now it's about money. Kale came to ask for money from the Count. Of course his request was granted immediately. He needs a lot of money. Kale lay on the bed, looking at the check in his hand. At that moment, Ron approached and placed a cup of tea on the table and said, It was honey tea that was made for Kale by his son. After saying that, he didn't forget to wish him good night. He will always be by his side. Kale's sleepiness dissipated. He thought to himself that no matter what happened, he had to quickly push these 2 guys to Choi-han. The next day, Kale was walking on the street. He suddenly remembered what happened that morning. Ron, after he heard that Kale was coming to the capital, started a rabbit hunting course for him. The old man's description of how to peck rabbits and things was so shabby that Kale was scared even thinking about it now. What a scary old man. But anyway, he was glad to have him by his side to the capital.